I'm Aaron.
I'm Brianna.
Sarah.
I'm Scott.
So this is an overview of our presentation. We'll start with an overview of the organization, talk about our goals, opportunities for improvement, our objectives and activities, our successes, challenges, lessons learned, and our recommendations for the future. Farm Davis is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. More than that, it is a form of nonviolent protest, advocating food as a human right. This is accomplished through the reclamation of public and private spaces to grow food for those who need it the most. Farmers involved share half the produce and they give the rest to organizations serving people who cannot afford to buy fresh produce. This includes Davis Community Meals and Cesar Chavez Plaza, a low-income housing facility. These efforts guide the organization. Their goal is to promote a culture of generosity and sharing. Farm Davis core values represent the organization's backbone. Paying it forward means to give without the expectation of receiving in return. On the flip side, by building on the ideas and the generosity of others, always accept gifts that are given. By employing economic models that promote an equitable and generous culture, Farm Davis works towards community development. By working when they can, farmers are not held obligated to be present at any particular time, so that they develop their own motivation to be involved as much as they want to. And when farmers can work, they should do it with love and joy, and through that, farmers learn to value qualitative engagement over quantifiable results. Our client, Robin Waxman, started Farm in San Francisco as her master's thesis project at the California College of Arts in 2009. The first farm location was created there at Hooper Street, which was adjacent to the college, and it's still being operated today. Robin has moved Farm to Davis in the fall of that same year, and Farm Davis has been evolving ever since. This is a map of all the locations. Farm Davis started out with the first location at K Street. Robin lived there at the house with her husband and raising their daughter. Robin moved to Farm 2.6 with her family and leased out the K Street house to tenants who were not involved with Farm, but they agreed to live there with Farm continuing to operate in the front yard. And that's the way it is still today. Eventually, a third farm location was acquired at Valdora Street in South Davis, and that is being operated what's in the front yard of Orhan's house, a prominent farmer. And these are some of the farmers, certainly not all of them, but these are the ones that we got to know the most and who we felt were the most active throughout our project. Jason and Rumana are neighbors with Robin, and they're highly involved in Farm 2.6. Orhan operates the Valdora Street farm. He's highly active at all the locations, and he's a very experienced gardener. Caitlin is a SAS major, interned last quarter with Robin's Farm to School project called Grow and Give, and continues to be highly involved. Jen is active at all the locations. She's a regular attendee at many of the work days, and she also manages the fiber and dye garden at Farm 2.6. She spins and dyes wool and makes her own clothes. Throughout this project, as consultants, we developed an understanding for what the opportunities were for improving Farm Davis, and these were the contributing factors that characterized what Robin felt needed to be addressed. When Robin lived at K Street, with her living in the house, the farmers felt really comfortable going into the front yard at any time to hang out, garden, do whatever. And when Robin moved to Farm 2.6, operations were in the back of the house. Farmers felt less comfortable going into the back of her house, and also felt less comfortable going to K Street Farm because there were non-farmers living there. And then with the acquisition of Valdora Street, Farmers were spread out across all 3 locations. Work days have been held every other Saturday and rotate through each location so that work days are held at each location every 6 weeks. Farmers naturally develop preferences for specific locations, but momentum was lost, can be lost with such a spaced out rotation, with either having too much to do or not enough to do at any particular location at any time. And this has resulted in intermittent attendance of members at work days and responsibilities spread out across all 3 locations. So taking advantage of these opportunities, we developed the needs of Farm Davis that shaped our project goals as consultants. By empowering farmers to take on leadership roles, contributed to strengthening the leadership structure within the organization, facilitating increased communication and collaboration amongst farmers also helped to unify their efforts and increase their sense of ownership over their projects, and this allowed for farmers' skills to come forward. Ultimately, the goals facilitated increased engagement amongst farmers and between farmers and the community at large. What comes out of working towards these goals is that our client has increased motivation to continue operating farm, and it also helps to bring cohesiveness and better define the goals of the organization.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the activities that we had the pleasure of participating in throughout these past 2 quarters and in our project design. So one of the things that we stepped into was an organization that already exists, that already has members, and we had a lot of questions. What are the needs of these members? Who are these members? What are their interests? And to answer some of these questions, we held a stakeholder advisory meeting at the end of the fall quarter, and we dispersed some surveys, and we tried to gauge the interest level and the level of participation that was already existing within the organization, and trying to come up with a practical solution on how we could engage farmers more. And from here, we generated a lot of ideas, and a lot of these ideas we couldn't necessarily follow through with in the scope of our project, but were good conversations for the future. And from here, we took some of the most practical ideas and moved forward with them. And the cornerstone of our activities really came with the creation of a monthly farm dialogue, a space where farmers could come together. And even from, I think it was a slide from the last presentation where they said the key success to projects is in relationships. And that is very true with Farm Davis. It's very much driven with these personal relationships that exist among the members, and trying to strengthen these. And from there, we came up with the idea of starting something called the Last Sunday Supper, which is a very simple idea to have a place where people could come together and build strengthen friendships and talk about ideas. And from these happened on the last week of January and February, and there's a beautiful table full of food. And if our project was if the success of our project was gauged just on the quality of the food that we had at some of these events, then we passed with soaring colors. And so from there, we also had the idea that at these suppers, these were a place for people to talk about their interests for work days and Skillshare. So Farm Davis has a bi-weekly work day, which rotates throughout their locations. And we thought that at the Sunday supper, this is a place where people can talk about their interests on what will happen with these work days. And from there, the pieces kind of fell together to do an educational component at these work days. And so we participated and facilitated in some capacity these Skillshares. And so on week 2, we had a chicken coop cleaning, orchard fertilizing, and a presentation from the Refarmery, which was a cool group out of Rio Linda who were really nice, actually really like-minded with Farm Davis, and it really seemed to fit into the whole feel of the organization. And it was really great because adding this educational component took a day that was really about cleaning a chicken coop and taking the manure and putting it on the orchard. But at the end of that, you got to have this nice presentation, and you got to talk with like-minded people, and it was something that really brought out quality engagement within the organization. On week 4, there was a seed sowing Skillshare, and this was led by Ramona, who's actually seated right here. And as a prominent farmer as well, very promising. And this was great because it was something as simple as sowing seeds for spring. And You can turn that into an educational component by saying something like, did you know that the potting soil that you use for sowing seeds isn't actually the same as soil that you get from the field, and it's not even technically soil at all. And adding that sort of educational aspect to a workday kind of piques people's interest, and said, rather than working, it has something that I can go out and learn. And then on week 6, there's a vermicomposting skill share, also led by Romana, who's very passionate about bringing vermicompost into Farm Davis. And there she is holding a worm. And this was great. And this was actually at Orhan's house, who wasn't even there. And Robin sent her daughter, Sophia, who's also here, through the doggy door to break into Orhan's house. And this was great because Orhan takes really great care of his yard. And so we show up for a work day, and there really wasn't a lot of work to do. And so if there wasn't this sort of educational component there, you know, I don't know what we would have done. We would have figured something out. And then week 8 was a grape pruning skill share, and this was led by Joaquin, and he, somewhere in there, this guy. And he, this was great because the vineyard definitely needed some leaven, and there was actually 2 kinds of grapes. There was wine grapes and there was table grapes, and this was all based around, do you know there's a difference between how you prune a table grape versus how you prune a wine grape? And it brought out some great people that, you know, are only coming out because it's something about grapes. And then week 10, there was a seed saving skill share, and this was led by Melanie, who has her seeds in the domes. She's the mother of the Seed Saving Alliance, and she came out and led this great talk about saving seeds, and it generated all this political talk about Monsanto and, you know, things that UC Davis wouldn't know anything about, and you know, and the importance of saving seeds, and it brought a political aspect to farm, and it showed a lot about how members were like-minded. And then there was our idea and our unique opportunity to create an internship program with UC Davis, and we worked to just come up with a template, to come up with some basic positions, and to distribute those among the listservs and try to create more structure. And so we had some potlucks and we had some skill shares, and you might be thinking, so what? You know, what's the logic behind this? And so the idea is really about a participatory process. You know, you come to a work day, you see something you're interested in, well, hey, you can come to this Sunday supper. And at the Sunday supper, you can collaborate with the other members, you can strengthen the relationships, and from there, you know, it'll make you want to participate more at these work days. Or you can even substitute work day for any other sort of activity that's going on with the farm. And from there, you can increase leadership. This brings people to want to lead a skill share or to start a project, something like that. And then from there, it increases the ownership. You feel like, you know, you own this, and from there, it's a cycle of a participatory process.
So along the way, we encountered a lot of challenges, and I'd say our 3 biggest challenges were the ones seen up here. They all sort of revolve around understanding Farm Davis, which is something we had a really hard time doing in the beginning, was understanding farm, core values, what it stood for, the dynamics, and so it took us a while to really get up on our feet and get going with our project. So, so with the identifying goals and objectives, that sort of showed us where there's opportunities for improvement, and then the determining the effective solution sort of showed us how we could achieve that. So, and like I said, in the very first few weeks, we really struggled with understanding farm and how we could help consult farm and basically, you know, address any of the problems that farm had. So we had a lot of ideas in the beginning that we ended up completely changing because they were just they weren't what was best for farm. And so some of those included writing like bylaws or advertising all over the community, and then we got so hung up on having this huge event where we thought we'd invite hundreds of people and we would advertise farm and just get it all out there and attract a lot of people to come. And then we sort of realized this isn't very sustainable and this isn't really what is best for farm. So we sort of had a big challenge of letting that idea go and then sort of adopting more of a design process. And so we had a lot of conflicts with our own agenda and preconceived notions and understanding the values of farm, which sort of brought us into understanding that we needed to transition from, you know, focusing on quantity and getting a lot of people to know about farm, attracting a lot of people into farm, and focusing more on the quality of the farmers that were already there. And so it took, Robin had to constantly remind us that we needed to focus less on the quantifiable results and more on the qualitative engagement with the current farmers, because she just felt that introducing new members all the time sort of disrupted the flow with the current farmers' engagement process and productivity, and which sort of lowered the quality. So we just had to learn to focus, more on who showed up, how often they showed up, what they were interested in doing, which locations they wanted to show up to. So we had a really rough time with that. And like I said, it all just sort of revolves around understanding the farm as a whole.
So, since I was a farmer long before I was a student in this class, I am very excited about getting to benefit from the successes from this class. So, and I'm gonna, after I tell you about the successes, I'll give you some examples from all the activities that Eric talked about of how these successes were manifested. So, one of our first success categories was increased engagement. So like Brianna was saying, we had to make this transition, which we finally did, from constantly worrying about quantity. So it wasn't just the people originally, it was also we were like thinking we need to grow more food. And it was really, we got it. So it took time, but it was worth it. And then we were able to include participants who were like specialized or focused in one area into other aspects of the organization. For instance, one of our members at the advisory meeting, who was primarily, or one of our participants, sorry, who was at our advisory meeting, who was primarily active with the Fiber Dye Garden at the Farm 2.6 location, became very interested in community mapping projects, discovering more of like what farm is and making connections within the community. Our second category of successes was rethinking the way things were done. So it was another transition. Instead of coming up with tangible products that we were like kind of expecting to have this big event like Brianna was talking about, we managed to make that other transition of overcoming that. Yeah, and so we were able to change the way things were done because it'll be more of a sustainable way in the long run. And then the distribution and planning of leadership roles. So, for instance, at the last Sunday Sunset Suppers, instead of work days and skill shares being planned completely by Robin, they're now able to be planned by different members within the community who decide to step up, like Romana, who decided to do both the seed sowing / potting soil workshop and the vermicomposting workshop. So that way it takes that load off of Robin and increases that feeling of ownership. The favorite part. So on the left was our first last Sunday Sunset Supper, and on the right was our advisory meeting at the end of last quarter. So this is the beginning of this quarter, and we definitely, like, our goal for each of them was completely different. This, the last Sunday Sunset Suppers, hopefully is a continuing tradition. This is one of the things of like changing the way things are done, changing the process in order to increase that leadership and participation. It was specifically designed to not be coordinated with a work day, because a lot of times when we had work days, the participants were tired or had to get going. So this is an event where people come specifically to enjoy themselves and bring food to share, which is one of the things that farmers love to do most. The advisory meeting, well, both the last Sunday Sunset Suppers and the advisory meeting increased the engagement. An example was one of the ideas of a tangible product we had was creating an advisory board to work hand in hand with our current board of directors. But out of both of these meetings and our other last Sunday Sunset Supper that we've had since these pictures were taken, we had decided from the participants, they voiced their opinion that these events, these monthly meetings should be the advisory committee. So it's a constantly changing group of voices and opinions. So that's very exciting. And then also being able to take on the planning. So it's the distribution of the planning and leadership roles, as well as kind of adding to the feeling of ownership. So, and then the next one's the Skillshares and Workdays. So they gave the leadership opportunities to not just run the Skillshares, but also to do different projects within the Workdays.
So for lessons learned, one that we learned was that a shortcoming, what we thought to be a shortcoming doesn't necessarily have to be a negative quality, and actually turned out to be more of a positive aspect of farm. So for example, at first we thought that a lack of consistent commitment amongst farmers was sort of a bad thing, like they kind of come and go, and we kind of looked at it like we didn't really understand it. But then when we got to know farm and understand that the core values stated, come and work as you please, come when you want to and when you can. And so we kind of realized, that's actually, really positive quality. So we had to sort of learn to decipher between what was really an issue and what was actually just a unique characteristic of farm. And so also, as I was saying, the core values was a very useful guide for us, that when we feel we'd sort of get sidetracked in understanding farm or trying to develop where our project was going to go, we would constantly look back at the core values to sort of remind us what farm was about, to remind us about the dynamics of farm, and to help us understand the unique characteristics of farm. And also that the success of our project does rely upon the farmers as well as ourselves. So even though it was our project and we had the role of facilitator, we had to understand that the success of this project did rely upon farmers and their engagement and their level of commitment to taking on leadership roles and stuff like that. So we had to understand that if something didn't turn out the way we wanted it to, it wasn't always, because of us. And we also learned that we had to have a lot of patience because, like I said in the beginning, we had a really hard time understanding farm and figuring out what we were going to do with our project and how to best consult farm. We had to have patience and just remain focused on the main objective and remain focused on what the original problem was and where we wanted to end up with that. And that kind of ties in with remaining focused. As I said, it was very easy to feel discouraged and to kind of detour away from our main objective, and so we just had to learn to stay focused on the main problem and our goals.
All right, so we completed the project. We did it. We had a few ideas that never really hit the ground running, though, per se. And then also, we wanted to leave our mark on Farm Davis. So we developed 5 recommendations that we thought could best suit the future of farm. And the first one is a formalized structure for decision making. We thought that this could kind of spread the leadership roles a little bit more, and also increase roles for certain people. The sense of ownership is definitely the key throughout that one, and especially for deciphering or deciding internships, as well as the deciding the Skillshares, as well as the Sunset Suppers. Also, increasing a social media presence. Definitely, it seems like the direction that most organizations tend to be going in. So the main reason that we wanted to put this one in here is for the display of all the creative, awesome things that go on at Farm Davis right now. Most of the pictures that we got, we actually kind of stole from Romana's Facebook. And I mean, that in and of itself is a great way. I mean, it's not necessarily an advertisement, but it's a nice way to show the protest that's going on. And also, it could be a means of facilitation for communication. Once again, these work days only happen every 2 weeks. So there's this lull period in between, with the exception of the sunset supper. So having a forum to establish a dialogue and to communicate, whether that's Facebook, we had talked about it